What's up, everybody? It's me, Coach Mills here, and today we're going to be breaking down one of the most underrated DPS in the entire game, Hanzo. Not only does he have good matchups against many of the top meta characters that are being played right now, making him an anti-meta pick, but honestly, a god tier Hanzo can just straight up hard carry. So let's break down everything you need to know to master this character as quickly as possible. Now, first off, let's talk about why Hanzo is actually good. First off is his one-shot potential. And no, I'm not talking about the random headshots you get from spamming, although those are pretty nice. I'm talking about the fact that a Hanzo can just one-tap any squishy in the game outright, meaning that a Mercy Pocket or a Suzu just simply doesn't matter to a Hanzo hitting you in the head. On top of that, characters like Ana are rather easy to headshot when they're trying to heal and scope in, and you're less susceptible to a lot of the utility seen by Ana, Mercy, and Kiriko, plus you can deny res. So if you combine all these things together, Hanzo is pretty freaking good at countering the current meta. Now, of course, we also got to talk about Hanzo's dueling capabilities, because Hanzo can get that one shot off. While it's not easy to master the mechanical aspect of Hanzo, when you do, you can give pretty much any DPS a run for its money and just win the fight out of nowhere. Now, something that you have to master if you want to dominate on Hanzo is your positioning. At the start of every fight, you should typically be playing from a very far range so that you can get a certain amount of spam and poke before the enemy even gets to the fight. This is going to allow you to apply pressure, generate ult charge, and potentially get a pick off. And one of the easiest ways to actually get those cheeky one taps from range is just by playing on flat ground relative to the enemy team and putting your crosshair at head level so that you don't actually have to flick up or down. You can just spam at that regular height. It's definitely going to get you some free picks and pickoffs. But the other thing that you have to be able to incorporate in Hanzo is an off angle. And oftentimes, getting a shot on the enemy that is actively trying to dodge you from mid to far-ish range is going to be pretty hard, because if they're not in any fixed position because of the travel time of the arrows, it's going to be very difficult for you to guarantee get that shot off unless they're jumping or something like that. However, if you can take specific off angles that give you a clear line of sight on the enemy, you're going to be able to kill characters like Ana's, Mercy's, Cassidy's, Widowmakers, because when these opponents are in fixed positions or they think they're safe, their movement is going to be rather static and a lot easier for you to predict and time, especially if they're doing static left-right straying, because the alternative is an opponent that is looking directly at you and they can do something like stagger stepping or move in a way that's very hard for you to predict. Now, one of the biggest questions I get about Hanzo as far as positioning is concerned is distance. Should you always be distancing super far away from your target, or should you ever close in that distance because it's easier to get shots off? How do you play around distance? Well, Hanzo is one of the few characters in the game that actually has a pretty effective range basically no matter where he is. I mean, you don't necessarily want to be point blank to a target. However, if you are close to a target that has a far effective range, like you can play really up close to a Widowmaker, for instance, and if you played really far from her, it might be easier for her to kill you. So you can play with your effective range around certain matchups. Characters like Genji, you want to distance yourself and get as many shots off as possible before they're even onto you, because you want to bait out things like deflect and potentially even get a pick off on him before he's within kill range. But other characters that have a further effective range, you would rather take them up close, and you can find key situations to min-max your distance depending on the matchup. Now, we do got to talk about the mechanical skill on Hanzo, because there is a huge difference between a godly Hanzo that seemingly gets kills every single freaking fight and a Hanzo that cannot hit the bright side of a barn or shoot a tank for that matter. Now, the number one thing that you have to master on Hanzo is actually patience. It's not about forcing damage and forcing shots. It's about waiting for that right moment where you can try and predict the opponent's movement. If they're jumping, moving left and right, holding your crosshair steady in between where the enemy is and where they want to go, so that you can time it as they move back to cover. These are the type of things that you have to master specifically with Hanzo because of that long travel time. And it really comes down to patience. If you whiff one single headshot, panic, use your storm arrow, and get a little bit of damage off, you're not utilizing the potential one-shot capability of Hanzo, and you're wasting resources on something that probably won't get any kills or value. The other thing that you need to understand about Hanzo is that you can win every single squishy matchup. All it takes is one headshot, and oftentimes, if you panic, that's exactly what the opponent wants. When the Genji dashes on top of you, when the Tracer blinks or double blinks in for the kill, when an Ana is trying to duel you, and maybe they're trying to nade you and shoot you, or whatever the case may be, a Hanzo has to be able to perform under pressure, because you can win a matchup no matter what disadvantage, no matter what health total, as long as you focus up, look for that key opportunity where the opponents get over eager with the duel and they put themselves in a form of static movement. Because oftentimes the opponent is going to be the most vulnerable right when they're about to win the matchup, because they're just trying to close it out and they're not as disciplined with their movement anymore. Of course, one of the things that I always suggest when you're trying to develop your mechanical skill is try free-for-all, especially with Hanzo. You're at a fundamental disadvantage in a lobby like that, and that's good, because oftentimes it's going to replicate that same pressure that you're going to experience in ranked. Now we're going to move on to 5 things that you need to do on Hanzo if you want to become an elite level Hanzo. But first, do me a huge solid and smash that like and subscribe. Now, the first thing that we need to talk about is Hanzo's Dragon Strike. This is a really strong ultimate, but many people underrate it because they're often expecting too much of it. It's not going to be something that kills like a million people on the enemy team, but it can be used for a huge tempo play. You could use it to solo ult an opponent that you know can't get out using your Sonic Arrow to find information, and just getting a key pick off with an ultimate that you generate so quickly, in addition to being able to apply more pressure now, might aid in you getting another pick off, which is fantastic. You can also use it to counteract opponents' ultimates if they rush in to a grab or an Orisa ult. You can counter that and often get opponents that are pushing in caught up in the blast. And of course, you could use Hanzo's Dragon for space creation. If you have no one to touch the cart, but you need your opponents to get off of it because it's about to cap an objective, Dragon can force them off of it or damage them enough to where retaking or fighting them after the fact is a lot easier. The next tip that I got to give you on Hanzo is that Storm Arrow is a specific tool, and it's often used to close fights or output a ton of damage to a big target like a tank. It's not something that you should use in a panic. We talked about this before, how you shouldn't just whiff shots and then use Storm Arrow to try to cover up the whiff. Oftentimes you want Storm Arrow as a tool to finish off a weakened target rather than just using it to start the fight or using it just because you're whiffing. And I know that everyone has done this because we've all been there. Now, the next thing that we got to master on Hanzo is about Sonic Arrow. And Sonic Arrow is one of the most powerful singular abilities in the game, especially when attached to a character that has one-shot capability. Hanzo often wants to alternate between different angles because he really wants to shoot at enemies that are not necessarily actively dodging him, right? So he'll go through periods of putting pressure on the front line, long distance spam, trying to get potential pickoffs, go for off angles here and there, and also go for high ground plays. He'll kind of rotate between these as long as he has his leap and he has active line of sight with his supports. He's not under a crazy amount of threat, but if he ever does get jumped on, pushed, or potentially shot at, what he can do is he can Sonic Arrow a retreation. So he leaps away, Sonic Arrows, and now if any squishy tries to chase him, he can just line it up with their head and just get a free kill. It's like a trap, and most of the time, it's just going to deny the opponents from punishing you at all. This is how Hanzo can cash in on some value unpunished. Like if you take a cheeky off angle, get a one-shot, Sonic it, now their Genji can't reliably go and punish you or get the trade-off, which means that you just get one kill in the bag for free. On top of that, you can use Sonic to help an aggressive play. If the opponent gets a pick-off and you want to do something like deny res, or you want your team to play more aggressively, Sonic Arrow can give you and your team the information to make a proactive play after an initial follow-up. Now let's talk about some compositions with Hanzo. What compositions work the best and what compositions don't really match him? Well, Hanzo's not going to be great in a dive, mainly because you're not going to be able to set the terms of the engagement. You can't really run in with your dive characters without putting yourself at risk or putting yourself far too in the fight at a rather close distance that you're not comfortable with. You would like to play in compositions that play at that mid to long-ish range, so characters like Sigma, Orisa, even Reinhardt is perfectly fine. And then realize up against dive compositions or characters that have mobility, you have to be extra disciplined with the off angles and high grounds that you're taking. Just because you can take a high ground on a whim doesn't actually mean it's the safest position for you if the opponent has multiple characters that can jump on you and you don't really have peel that can be given to you at a moment's notice up there. Now, last up, I want to talk about what is the difference between a good Hanzo and a great Hanzo. Because a good Hanzo can be someone that gets key pickoffs, can be someone that actually can hit their shots, and someone that provides a decent amount of pressure and damage. But what makes a great Hanzo? One thing that a Hanzo needs to make sure that they practice and they hone in mechanically is never missing the easy shots. And when I say easy shots, what do I mean? I'm talking about the shots where the Sojourn flies in with the slide, or the standing still Ana or Widowmaker, or any of the shots where an opponent is in a fixed position. The goal should be to absolutely never miss these shots at all. Now, the second thing I would say that a Hanzo needs to learn is when a fight is winnable and it's a duel that you should take and challenge, like let's say you're up against a Tracer, or when is a fight something that you should abort and just leave and run away. It really comes down to the resources the opponents have, like how many blinks does that Tracer have, what's your health total, what's your confidence in your mechanical skill. There's several factors that you have to consider when whether or not you just run away from every fight you get across or you stand your ground, try to win a matchup. And it requires a Hanzo player to be really attentive as far as what abilities and utility the opponents have, what is the current battle state, like how many opponents are alive and how many of your team is alive and where are they positioned. And while mechanics are important on the character, I think Hanzo actually requires a lot of game sense to truly master him. Now, if you like the content, do me a huge solid and smash that like, subscribe. Definitely let me know what hero guides you want to see next, and I will see you next time.